This video was brought to you by the latest in Twitter poll technology. Just to make something clear, I'm not a superstitious person. If you asked me 9 years ago if I believed in ghosts and shit, I would have wholeheartedly said yes. Of course, that was me 9 years ago. Now I consider the paranormal to be nothing more than imaginative attempts by others to make listeners believe, if just for a second, that unexplainable occurrences can happen. Although I firmly do not believe in the supernatural, that does not mean that I haven't seen some rather questionable stuff. Now sit back, relax, and listen. For those of you not aware, the Japanese and American governments have an agreement that states that while the American military is allowed to stay, for the time being, on Japanese soil, we do not own the facilities that we live and work in. The Japanese own all of these facilities, they merely share them with us. One of these facilities in particular is a hangar bay that dates all the way back to the era of World War II Imperial Japan. This is something you can look up for yourself, by the way. I've never seen this hangar bay for myself until I had already spent about a month living in Japan. One day in November of 2017, I was told at the last minute by one of my supervisors to stand watch at this hangar bay from the hours of midnight until 8 a.m. Even if it was last minute, I had no right to refuse, not just because it would be massively disrespectful, but because the one who was previously going to do this was admitted to the hospital for reasons they never told me. Begrudgingly, I accepted. The hangar bay in question was in an area surrounded by JMSTF buildings, and since I was still relatively new to Japan at the time, this was a part of my base I had never been to before. However, one particular tidbit of information I was told by both Japanese civilians and my co-workers was that the hangar bay I was headed to was haunted. Supposedly, the hangar bay was home to the souls of Japanese pilots that, long ago, had committed suicide after Imperial Japan had surrendered. I dismissed their comments as nothing more than trying to scare the new guy. Upon arriving at the hangar bay, I didn't realize until I felt the cold night's breeze that I made the mistake of not bringing a jacket. Although I was very much used to wearing my uniform, it would do little to protect me from the cold weather. Furthermore, because the hangar bay itself was a very old and rarely used building, the Japanese decided to cut costs by removing the heaters and boilers. This meant that while the lights and water sources were still functional, there was no hot water or heated areas to be found. I was stuck in a nearly abandoned and overly chilly building for the next 8 hours, with nothing but my phone and the sound of ambient machinery to keep me company. My responsibilities were simple. I was supposed to sit at a desk at the end of a hallway, and conduct a thorough patrol of the entire building every hour to ensure everything was fine, with updates every 30 minutes in a logbook to note any changes. We had only one aircraft inside the hangar bay, but I was to keep watch in case, by some miraculous event, a fire or some other equally disastrous event were to start. Babysitting an inanimate metal object is boring, but simple. Although my phone service was spotty within the building, I was able to keep myself occupied by texting acquaintances back in the States as well as just watching videos on YouTube. Initially, time went on without a problem. I carefully searched the hangar bay as well as any unlocked rooms for anything worth reporting, and when I found nothing, I returned to my desk and updated the logbook. This was the case for a good hour or so, and I began to develop a routine once 2 a.m. came around. My routine was broken when I heard a curious sound at 3:15. My initial reaction was that someone had entered the building, albeit severely late at night. However, once I realized that I likely would have been told if someone was on the way, I got up from my desk and again investigated the area. I was absolutely certain that the sound did not come from my phone, so I inspected every possible door and available room for any sign of someone having entered. Apart from some rather amusing graffiti that I had failed to notice earlier, I was not able to find anything had changed. Since there was a door directly behind my desk leading outside of the hangar bay, I assumed the sound I had heard came from a facility outside the door, most likely a Japanese civilian taking care of some late-night cleaning. Relieved that I did not have to report anything, I turned back to my phone and continued browsing through YouTube. Like I said before, babysitting an inanimate metal object is boring, but simple. It wasn't boring for long. I was halfway into conducting another search of the building when I heard it. Frantically, I ran towards the source of the noise, which was one of the hangar bays of the building. I hauled the door open only to be greeted with only one thing. Nothing. There was nothing inside that could have possibly made the noise. Nothing had fallen, nothing had been opened, and nothing had changed. I searched high and low inside of that hangar bay for anything that could have potentially caused that noise, but once again, I found nothing. The remainder of the night had me on edge. I scrounged enough money from my wallet to buy a coffee from one of the vending machines within the building in order to stay awake, but nothing else happened. I remained alone with my phone until the morning, when a friend of mine arrived to pick me up. The entirety of the car ride back home was silent. I don't know if I really looked that exhausted or if he just didn't feel like striking up a conversation, but no attempt at starting a conversation was made. I haven't been to that hangar bay since then. Other people have been there in that time, and nobody else had anything happen to them like me. Or at least, nobody ever said if anything happened. Again, I firmly do not believe in the supernatural, because I find the idea of something you cannot explain to be ridiculous, because how can anything happen without a cause? However, every once in a while, I look back and think, in a room where everything is stationary and nobody is present, how do you produce a sound? Thank you for listening.